I woke that morning to Rory delightedly screeching, "Again! Again!" Wandering out from the room we'd been sleeping in, I found pure baby chaos. Rory was stark naked, hanging from Charlie's black, mercurial being, swinging back and forth. His little bare bottom would tap the ceiling, and Charlie would swing him down in an arc, his little toes grazing the floor, and back up so that his button nose almost touched the ceiling on the other side. Rory would then push off the ceiling with his feet, down and up, back and forth, only slowing down just enough so his small body wouldn't collide in a crash with the ceiling. "What the? Charlie, put him down!" "I wasn't hurting him," his smoky voice sulked. I gave him the stink eye. "Rory, where's your diaper?" Rory gave me his most mischievous giggle and pointed out the wide-open front door at his dirty diaper and a small mound of dirty wipes that must have been haphazardly tossed through the door. I looked to Charlie. "Did you try to change him?" "As you know, I cannot leave this place. For that matter, I cannot enter any room with a threshold. I am bound to wander this room, the hallway, the room you sleep in, and that place you eat in, for an eternity. The small one was stinking the place up, and for the first time ever, I have wished for death. We could not reach his fresh diapers." "And you were swinging him. Why?" "We were airing his foul-smelling bottom." I did my best not to laugh at the hysterical image of this dark, ancient being attempting to wipe Rory's butt. I let the rest of what he said sink in. So, he could traverse through only part of the house. I had chosen the room we slept in, which was probably a formal dining room or den, because it was closest to the door. It had also contained the only mattress. Perhaps I should consider lugging the old ratty mattress into one of the actual bedrooms that had a threshold. After a quick breakfast, Rory stripped off his clothes again and ran through the house, giggling. I wanted to walk to town to get groceries, so I didn't have time for his nudist proclivities. I guesstimated that it would take at least an hour to walk to the nearest store. Rory continued to streak through the house. Charlie was still sulking on the ceiling in his blob form. "Stop him!" "Charlie, he's just a kid." "No!" He morphed into his human form and pointed. "Stop him!" Rory was at the end of the hall struggling with a closet door I had been unable to open. I figured the old house had shifted, warping the door frame, permanently shutting the door. "He can't get it open. It's just a closet." The door swung open with a creaking, screeching moan, revealing a set of stairs, which Rory quickly crawled up, giggling and laughing. I took off toward Charlie, who was scowling and stomping across the ceiling toward the door, mumbling to himself. My curiosity outweighed my fear as I ran beneath him. On each stair was a long line of inscribed Nephilim script. Looking up from the bottom of the stairs, I could see sunshine spilling through a window set in a soft, cream-colored wall. "That's where they hid from me," Charlie grumbled. It was a room, a beautiful, sunshine-filled room with a huge closet and a massive bath. The flippers must have set this space up as a master suite. I had figured those windows had led to an attic, so I'd never gone searching. If the living room housed a demon, I hadn't wanted to know what lived above. Around the topmost part of the wall, the outermost edge of the floor, and on all the rafters ran strings of the archaic script. I caught my naked baby brother and brought him back down the stairs. Charlie eyed us suspiciously. "It's just a room, Charlie. I thought Rory was going to get hurt." He harumphed at me and went back to sulking. I would definitely be dragging the mattress and our stuff up there that night. It took us 2 hours to get into town. Rory, deciding he wanted to be ornery because he couldn't stay at home with Charlie, made what should have been a quick trek into an arduous journey. People stared at us with wide eyes full of fear and concern. When I bought a little red wagon at the local toy store, no one would look me in the eye, though I could hear them all whispering behind my back. The entire time we were in the small grocery, people would deliberately go down different aisles or turn around and back out if we appeared. It didn't look like we'd be making any friends here anytime soon. When we got to the checkout, it seemed like all but one cashier and bagger had decided to go on break. While the older lady rang out our purchases, I watched her gaze shift from me to Rory and back again. "Oh, dang it!" she exclaimed. "I can't take it anymore. You see, Earl said he saw Cliff driving y'all to that damned house." "Judy, shh," mumbled the bagger. "No, I will not hush. They're just kids. And look at her. The circles under her eyes are darker than a new moon night. I'll be damned if I let that house—" "Ma'am," I interrupted, "it's really okay. I know about the house." "What the hell you want to live there for?" The bagger shouted more loudly than he meant to, judging by the red hue his cheeks took. "We don't have anywhere else to go, and that house is safer than the one with my stepfather in it." There was a mass intake of breath in gasp form from all the hidden eavesdroppers. Judy, the kind-hearted cashier, with eyes full of tears, grasped at my hand. "Oh, darling," she stuttered. "It's okay. We're all right. And we're safe for the most part." A giant hand clamped onto my shoulder, and I was roughly spun around by a grizzly of a man. "No, ye ain't safe. The devil's in that house." As I stared into the eyes of the man, I tried to decide which would be easier, to tell him that Charlie and I had come to an agreement, or to lie. The cross Judy was now fingering around her neck made the choice easier. I lied. "Sir, I prayed and prayed for help with my stepfather, and God told me He cleansed the house and sent us there. He said we'd be safe. It's just a creepy old house now." Judy put one hand in the air, looked toward the sky, and uttered a soft hallelujah. "How did yous even know about that place?" "My Uncle Rourke left it to me." "So Crazy Rourke bit it, did he?" I was surprised. Did this man know Uncle Roar? He must have noticed my surprise, because the hard look in his eyes softened. "Everyone knew of him." He took off his ball cap and scratched at his thinning hair before replacing it. "He was the last person to leave that accursed place alive. Then he went and bought up the whole street. Darlin', you own all of Griffin Drive. Why don't you and the Sprout live in one of the other houses?" "Damn!" Bagger Boy looked excited. "If the devil's really out of the house, you could have a seriously wicked haunted house party for Halloween this weekend." Judy promptly ended his excitement with a slap up the backside of his head. The whole walk home, I contemplated this new knowledge. I could just move us. It's not like we owed Charlie anything, but I had made a deal. And just because Charlie couldn't leave to come after us didn't mean he wouldn't send Luke. I was startled out of my reverie by Rory suddenly shouting, "Luke!" I had never actually stood so close to him before. Out in the bright sun, his beauty was even more breathtaking. "Luke, where in the hell did you come from?" "Luke! Luke! Luke! Up!" Rory stretched his arms up to him. Luke pointedly ignored him as he stared at my face. Where in hell? Some say a well-fortified cell, others the throne." He shrugged and then eyed me. "You let him taste your fear," he said flatly. "He said he wouldn't hurt us and we could stay if I did." "You realize this is not a one-time thing, right?" "Luke! What do you care?" "Look," he said, stopping and turning toward me. The little wagon slammed into my ankles. Do not mistake this as concern for you or the small one. You humans are nothing to me. But Charlie," he cleared his throat, "is my friend." He chewed on his words before he spit them in my face. The word friend must have tasted strange in his mouth. "He is an addict. He hasn't tasted human emotions in years. He's so close to being clean. I can't have you peddling to him for favors." "Luke!" "Fine, you persistent little bug." He leaned down and grabbed a grinning Rory. He tossed him high into the air, caught him, and placed him on his shoulders. Seeing Rory grinning madly, his little fists filled with Luke's golden locks, while perched safely on his broad shoulders, warmed my bruised soul just a bit. "I don't understand. Addict?" He sighed and looked down at me. "His kind was born long before any one god claimed ownership over creation. They were there for the first murder, the first rape, the first genocide, and felt nothing for human plights. Then, someone got the bright idea to take one of your kind out for a spin. For the first time in their history, they felt something. To him, feeling your happiness is like taking a lukewarm shower. Feeling your pain and misery, though, is like the highest high one can possibly feel. It invigorates him. And so, violent possessions were born." I stared at him. I'm quite certain that my mouth was gaping open. "So, when they do this, what happens to our souls? If he takes me too much, will my soul disappear?" He chuckled. "You watch too many movies. They don't want or need your souls, though some collect them as trophies. Little sparkly trinkets to show off and brag about. And when they're feeling in the mood, they can poke and prod them and get tiny whiffs of the delighted highs you once gave them. My kind, on the other hand, does take souls, but that's another conversation." Rory had been sitting silently upon Luke's shoulders, watching us both, but now his patience had run dry. "Geeky up, Luke! Geeky up!" He tugged on the golden locks. "Not so hard, bug." Charlie eyed us suspiciously when the three of us returned. Luke stopped and put Rory down at the door.
"What are you three doing together?"
"Have you been sulking all day?" I asked him.
"No, I've been brooding."
Luke rolled his eyes from the porch. I pulled the groceries into the kitchen and began putting them away. I had been unsure if Charlie and Luke needed or wanted to eat with Rory and me, but I had bought extra just in case. I set out some steaks and eggs and began making lunch. I figured I needed to make up for the peanut butter and jelly I had offered them before. I was trying to sift through all the information I had learned that day when an idea came to me. I knew from previous experience that Charlie could go into the little nook where the table was, and just past the table were 2 French doors leading onto the back porch. I threw both doors open and set one chair outside before shoving and scooting the table halfway out the door. When I was done, the table could now be the bridge between the 2 men. They could both sit and talk to each other. We could have our meal as a nice, happy... I didn't finish that thought. When the food was ready, I made them all sit at the table, Charlie on one end facing Luke on the other. Rory and I sat side by side. Charlie and Luke stared at each other for a long, quiet minute. "I haven't seen you right side up in 200-odd years?" Luke asked of Charlie. Charlie shrugged and looked down at his steak.
"Why are you being nice? I thought you were mad at me."
I cleared my throat to answer, but he suddenly looked up in a rage. He glared down at Luke, and his hand whipped out and touched my face. I felt his fingers melt into me. Before I could pull myself away, he ripped his hand back.
"How dare you? I am not an addict. If I could reach through that damn barrier, I would.
She should know. If you're going to feed your addiction using her, she had a right. Charlie gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles going white, and looked at me.
You may have heard of him.
He finger jabbed toward Luke.
His real name is Lucifer. And His Majesty plays a fucking saxophone in a fucking band in New Orleans.
Luke just sighed and put his face in his hand. I neatly filed away this new information to freak out about later. Right then, I had to stop the impending storm before the yelling upset Rory further. His little lip was already popped out and quivering, crocodile tears forming in his eyes as he looked from one man to the other. I said the first thing that came to mind. The people in town think we should have a haunted house for Halloween. They both stared blankly at me and in unison said,
What?
The people in town think we should have a haunted house for Halloween. I told them that God had cleansed the house and there wasn't a demon here anymore. They blinked several times.
Is this steak rare?
Charlie asked. A haunted house could be a lot of fun, Luke said as both men began tearing at the still, slightly bloody meat on their plates. You could help, you know, I grunted at Charlie while trying to move the mattress. He crossed his arms and scoffed from the table.
Luke and I are figuring out your stupid haunted house.
I sighed and went back to tugging it out of the room and toward the stairs. I really hadn't expected them to be so for throwing a haunted house. Luke was on the bandwagon until he realized Charlie would have access to whoever set foot in the house. With people all riled up and excited for a scare, there was no way Charlie wouldn't taste their fears. With much grumbling about not being an addict, Charlie finally promised that if he took people, he wouldn't do any lasting damage, and that this would be his last hurrah in the fear industry. I didn't believe him for a second, but Luke seemed satisfied. I wondered what would go down if Charlie broke his deal with the devil. By the time I got the mattress up the stairs, I was worn out. Rory was downstairs happily babbling away at Luke and Charlie while they argued over scary decor. I shoved the bed to the middle of the room and flopped down. The sheets could wait a minute. Luke had asked if he could call in some help. I had said sure, but was now having second thoughts. Who or what would arrive to help? With the windows open, the breeze felt amazing. I could feel my body lulling into a restful state. I rolled over, and the floor let out a creak of all creaks and startled me into a sitting position. I wiggled my butt back and forth on the mattress. Creak, clunk, creak, clunk. Well, that would most certainly not be pleasant to sleep with. Getting up, I pushed the mattress over. I used my weight on each floorboard until I found the culprit. If the boards hadn't made such a racket, I never would have noticed. There, smack dab in the middle of the room, was a small section, deliberately made to be invisible, that lifted up on a hinge. The small space below was dark and filled with cobwebs. It made me uneasy. The rest of the house was spotless, but this hole was dank and dusty. I reached in slowly, imagining all sorts of creepy crawlies would be on me in seconds. Probing around gently with my fingertips, a chill ran its fingers down my spine. I didn't like this. I was about to yank my hand out of the black hole and slam the little door closed when my fingers grazed a lump. Great. It was wrapped in a thin cloth that had been ravaged by time. I wonder how the flippers missed this. Maybe they hadn't. Maybe it was something bad and they had put it back in the hole and forgotten about it. My heart was racing. I was dripping in sweat. It would drive me nuts if I didn't take at least a peek. It was a book. There was a loud crash followed by yelling. I sighed and set the book on the floor and closed the small hatch. I'd finish checking the book later. My supernatural idiots were up to something. Splayed out on the front porch was a young man holding his bleeding nose. Both Luke and Charlie were laughing. Rory was peering out from behind Luke's leg. Luke leaned down and offered the man his hand.
"Did you forget?"
he asked the bleeding man.
"No. Yes. I don't know."
He stood up and gingerly raised his fingers to the barrier. It shimmered and gave a zap.
"Damn it!"
Who's this?" I asked. The three men turned toward me. Charlie was sitting backward on a chair, his feet tucked up on its legs so they didn't touch the floor. Luke was leaning on the porch railing, and the third just stood there with blood running down his face. Rory ran to me, giggling, and pointed at our new guest. "Boo-boo!"
"My name is not Boo-boo."
Rory looked at him like he was an imbecile, then rushed to the kitchen. He returned with paper towels trailing after him and offered them to the bleeding man. "For Boo-boo."
"I'm not Boo-boo."
He stared down at Rory's confused face. "It's for your nose," I explained. "You're bleeding. A boo-boo is an injury. You know, like an owie." He wiped at his face.
"Well, we're here. Do you want us to start setting up?"
I looked out to the front yard. There were at least 30 men standing there looking excited. In the next few days, Griffin Drive was crawling with the supernatural. I wasn't sure if they were demons or not, but I wasn't going to ask. Right then, they all looked human. I had been back and forth to town, buying up every candle and pumpkin I could find with money Luke had forced on me. At least 5 of the men were with me at all time. They bought candles and gift cards and passed out papers inviting the townsfolk to walk the haunted Griffin Drive. Everyone seemed ecstatic. The night of Halloween, after the sun had gone to bed and the moon claimed her rightful place, Griffin Drive came alight with the glow of hundreds of candles. Creepy carved jack-o'-lanterns lined the whole of the road. In each abandoned house, scary, sometimes gruesome scenes took place behind foggy and warped windows. The men had dropped their facade and now wandered as they truly were. Luke was in the backyard, sitting beside an absolute treasure trove of candies and goodies. "What's this?" He flashed a smile at me, showing teeth that were much too sharp.
"Halloween is one of the few times we can show ourselves, and people just write it off as fancy costumes and expensive makeup. It has been so long since I've shown anyone the way I was made."
His body was enveloped in a bright light that nearly blinded me. I covered my face with my hands.
"Oh, sorry. Like I said, it's been a while. You can look now."
His voice was deeper and had a musical quality to it. I almost shrieked at the sight before me. His body was now that of a lion, rippling with the hard and lean muscles of a predator. 4 giant wings erupted between his shoulder blades. They stretched and flexed. The tips spanned twice as long as his body. A long serpentine tail thumped softly on the dead grass. His beautiful face shared its space with the face of a hawk and a bear. 6 pairs of eyes blinked at me, almost in unison. My heart was in my throat as I backed away and tripped, landing in the ginormous pile of candy. "Luke!" I gasped. He sighed in return.
"I'm quite positive no one actually reads the Bible."
His body shivered. The 4 wings became 2. The 3 heads morphed together, leaving only the face I had come to know.
"Better?"
"What are you?"
"Right now, a sphinx."
I thought the Sphinx was a woman." He laughed, the pitch of his voice rising until it sounded like the soft ringing of a bell. His hair darkened to the shade of spun gold and grew long, covering the plump breasts that had sprouted from his chest like ripe fruit. His chiseled features had softened, and he became she. All of the world would fall to their knees to worship such beauty. "How's this?" Her voice was like honey. I could only stare. "Good. It makes the riddles harder to answer when you can't find your tongue." "Riddles?" "Yes. If they correctly answer, they get to take some treasure." One massive clawed paw gestured to the pile I was sprawled in. "If they don't?" She grinned, leaned in close to my face, and growled, "I shall eat them." "Wook! Wook! Boobies!" Rory tumbled down the stairs in his goblin costume, got up, and rushed to Luke. He buried his little face in the soft, downy fur below her breasts and giggled. "Kiki!" "This child," Luke sighed. "You're not really going to—" "No, I won't eat anyone." She laughed as she set him atop the mountain of sweets. The sound reminded me of wood chimes and silver bells. The night went off without a hitch. The whole of the town showed up. Charlie and Luke had picked a long, flowing, if not slightly revealing, black gown for me to wear. I sat on a red velvet chaise on the porch, welcoming the guests. The townspeople gaped at the houses filled with horrors and screams. They took pictures of my dozens of jack-o'-lanterns. Right as they were lulled into a false sense of security, the league of terrifying demons chased them down the road to me. "Welcome to my house of horrors." I gestured to the door. "You may enter in groups of 5, if, that is, you wish to leave alive." Everyone would cling to each other, giggling nervously. You could see them silently counting out their groups, looking to see who would be left out. One of Luke's men was stationed across from me, dressed in a butler's uniform, but with the massive head of a raven. He would push the door open and let 5 unlucky souls in. The door would slam shut behind them, with the help of the fishing line he had tied to the handle. When they entered, they would find a roaring fire and a single red velvet wing-back chair beside it. Except I had no fireplace. Once they entered, they were in Charlie's web. They would hear their names whispered by the voices of loved ones long dead. The fire would go out, leaving only a single candle burning on the imaginary mantelpiece. As their eyes would adjust to the waning light, their heartbeats would rise. They'd hear a childlike giggle, then hot, moist breath on the backs of their necks. Charlie would take them then. He would show them a planned-out horror. We had to be careful that everyone would see the same thing. After he would release them, they'd see light through the French doors, leading them to Luke. As soon as their fingers touched the doorknob, Charlie would softly call out, "In the garden, you will find a monster that is as old as time. She loves to riddle, but it is no jest. Beware, for the wrong answer will lead to death." Just outside the door, a ram-headed demon in a suit was waiting to give them the jump scare of their lives. Afterward, they'd meet the Sphinx. So many screams rang out that night. The street echoed with them. They were all followed by laughter as the groups came out of the garden and found a large bonfire with hot dogs, hamburgers, and a bar tended by Medusa herself. Well, There was a massive resemblance, but you could actually look at this one. The whole town had gone through, and it was now time to join the fun. As I started around the side of the house, my mind momentarily drifted to the prisoner trapped inside. Poor Charlie couldn't leave to join the festivities now that he had done his job. I told Ravenhead I'd catch up and ran into the house. Charlie was on me in a second. I felt my body go static as he took my mind. I was standing in the living room, surrounded by cameras and men with strange beeping boxes pointed at me. "If there's anyone here, can you tell us your name?" The voices sounded hazy, like long-forgotten whispers. "Can you make a sound for us?" The house moaned a response. I turned. The man behind me held what looked like an infrared camera nearly in my face. "I think we got something." "Nope, it's gone." The voices were getting clearer. "If there's anyone here." That voice, was it familiar? "We mean you no harm. Can you make yourself known?" I tried to answer, but found I had no mouth. My fingers clawed at the smooth spot where my lips had once been. "Maybe we should try something else, 'cause it isn't responding." "I don't think we should anger it." That voice I knew. I spun around. It was my Uncle Roar. What was going on? My mind was fuzzy. The one that had thrust the camera in my face was lighting something. Smoke filled the room. It was burning my nose. My lungs were filling with fire. I tried desperately to scream, but the spot where my mouth once was stayed firmly taut. My skin felt as though it was blistering, or millions of fire ants were biting me. Tears ran down my face. Suddenly, the man holding the smoldering sage was bleeding on the floor. Half his face torn open, one eye rolled out of its socket and plopped on the floor. The woman with all the questions was dangling in the air by her throat, choking and gurgling. She slammed into the wall with such force her head exploded, and it rained coppery-smelling brain matter across the floor. I turned and saw my beloved Uncle Roar in the monster's clutches. Rage filled me. I felt the skin rip apart on my face as my lips pulled into a feral snarl. "No!" I charged forward and tripped on my skirt. I blinked a few times and looked around. I was in the living room still, but there was nothing in it except a red chair. Charlie was squatting in the chair, looking at me curiously. I don't know what came over me, but I charged him. I wrapped my fingers around his throat as he just stared at me, mildly amused, if not a little surprised. I squeezed with all my might. He grabbed both my wrists and easily pulled me off of him. "Why?" he asked calmly. His eyes were glassy. He was high as fuck, the bastard. "That was my Uncle Roar!" I spat out through gritted teeth and tried to slap at him. He held my wrists firmly. The faint sounds of laughter filtered in through the open windows. "Charlie," Luke purred from the door, still female but no longer a sphinx, bouncing a half-asleep Rory on her hip. "What the fuck are you doing?" Charlie looked toward Luke, then back at me. "I didn't know." As soon as he let me go, I snatched Rory from Luke and ran up the stairs to our protected haven. I curled around Rory protectively and cried myself to sleep. I woke up puffy-eyed and congested. Rory was sitting on the floor, flipping through the forgotten book. It was full of the same Nephilim script that was all over the house. I threw off my wrinkled costume and changed quickly. Grabbing my half-naked brother and the book, I rushed down the stairs and shoved past Luke on the porch. "We need to talk." He was a man again, his voice velvet and lust once more. I glared at him and stomped down the stairs. "A rather bear of a man left this for you." He waved a piece of paper at me. I stomped back up and snatched the paper from him. "Moira, I saw the symbols in the house. You still have a problem."
Call this number. They may help, for a price.
I stuffed the note in my pocket and headed to town. When I got there, I headed straight to Judy's grocery. I set a grumpy Rory on her counter and begged to use the phone. In my rush to leave John's house, I had left my cell. He would have probably been able to track me with its GPS anyways.
Sure, honey, but is something wrong?
She handed me the phone. Tears threatened to leak from my face as I took a few deep breaths, shook my head no, and dialed the number. The phone was answered before the first ring was finished by a warm and sunny voice.
Mr. Lowe's Antiquities, Betty speaking.